Hey guys, today we're going to talk about parallel and perpendicular lines. We're just going to go through a couple examples and definitions right now. Parallel lines are lines that never intersect. Algebraically, how do we know if two lines are parallel? They both have the same slope. An example of that would be y equals 2x plus 7 and y equals 2x minus 1. Right, we can tell that these are in the form y equals mx plus b, but we can tell because the slope is 2 here, right? Perpendicular lines are lines that intersect at 90 degrees, right? If we're looking right here, this line intersects at a 90 degree with this one. You might see it like this in terms of, a 90 degree angle. Algebraically, we can see that they have opposite reciprocal slopes. What that looks like is y equals 2/3 x plus 7. And the opposite of that would be y equals -3/2 x minus 1. We can tell that the opposite, it's the opposite of positive is negative, and then the reciprocal is the flip, right? So when we're talking about negative reciprocals or opposite reciprocals, we flip it, right? So we look at the top and the bottom and we say 4/3, and that's a positive, so we make it a negative. Number 2 of the negative reciprocals, right? We have to think about this as like 2/1, right? The opposite of 2/1 is 1/2, and a positive becomes a negative. Number 3, right? The flip, right, is 8/7, and the opposite of positive is negative is positive, so we can leave it like that. Number 4 is probably tricky, but we have to think about 1. Obviously, we could say 1/1, right? Well, if we think about it as 1/1, well, 1/1 is really the same thing as 1, right? But the opposite is -1/1, which is just -1. So we could really just say 1 and -1. 5, we've talked about this a little bit last time, but we're talking about slopes, right? The opposite of a 0 slope, we've said, is undefined. That's important, guys. So we have to think about, like, there's a line like this, a horizontal line, and then obviously there's a straight vertical line. If we are given ordered pairs, right, it says AB is formed by -2/3 and 2/6, right? So we can think about this as we have to find the slope is y equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So we have x1, y1, and we have x2, y2. When we do that, right, we set it up. We have 6 on top minus 3 over x2 is 2 minus x1 is -2. And again, we can plug this into our calculator, right? And we have 3 on top, and we should get 4 on the bottom. If we look at the second one, right, we have y2 is 3 minus y1 of 0. If you want to write it twice, you can. If you just want to go down, you can. From the top one, x2 is 3 minus x1 is -1. Right, so that's 3 minus 0 is 3. 3 minus negative 1 is going to be 3 plus 1, which is force. Since they are the same, right, I would say same. That means parallel. Right? We're looking at 2. Same concept. We have to find the slope to tell if it's parallel, perpendicular, or neither. Right, so I'm going to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So y2 is 4 minus 2 is 1, or y1, x2 is 5, and x1 is 0. 2 over 5 will be that if we plug it into the calculator. We do the same thing for the second line, so CD. If you want to write it again, you can, right, if that helps you. And we have y2 is 3 minus y1 is 8. X2 is 3 minus x1 is 1. So 3 minus 8 should be negative 5 over 2. And so if we look, right, this is what we're talking about, the flip, right? We had the 2 on the bottom and the 5, or 2 on the top and the 5 on the bottom. Now we have the 5 on the top and the 2 on the bottom, and it went from positive to negative. So that means it's an opposite reciprocal, and I'm going to abbreviate, right? So that means that is a perpendicular. And you can just abbreviate that as perp if you want to, right? It's a mouthful. 3. I know this seems really redundant, guys, but I write x1, y1, x2, y2. Again, if you need to write the formula every time, that's what I do. It's good practice, but we don't have to. Y2 is 6. Y1 is 8. Then we have 2 minus negative 1. Negative 2 over 3 is that first one. If I do this same thing again, right, I have y2 is 3. Y1 is 2. X2 is 3 minus x1 is negative 1. So we have 3 minus 2, that's 1. And we have that being 1/4. If we look, right, they're not the same, right? They're not opposite reciprocals, so they're actually just neither. So we're just going to write neither. Right, they're just different kinds of lines that aren't necessarily parallel or perpendicular. That's one example of each, guys. If you need more examples, right, you can try 4 on your own, and then we can go from there. The next thing we're going to do, you guys, is we're going to look at 9. Right? 9 is a little bit different. We're still looking at equations, and we're looking at lines, but we really have to determine, are they parallel lines, are they perpendicular lines? I would always get them in the form y equals mx plus b. If we think about that right now, they're already in y equals mx plus b. Y equals mx plus b. again, if we look at just the slope, we just care about the slope, right? So that's m equals 7 and m equals 7, right? So they're the same slope, which means they are parallel. Which is perfect. If we look at 10, right, they're also in the form y equals mx plus b. If we're looking at everything again, we only care about the m. We care the m is 4/5, and this m is negative 5/4, right? We know that this 4/5, right, is the flip is 5/4, and it's positive to a negative. So that's the opposite reciprocal. And I'm just going to abbreviate that, which means that this is perpendicular. If you want to abbreviate that, guys, that's fine. You can just abbreviate it as perp and move on. Those are pretty easy because they're already in slope-intercept form. Let's just get some practice with something like 12, which is in standard form. Right, the trick here is we're going to look at this and solve for y. So to get y, we have to subtract x here. And so we have 6y equals negative x plus 30. To get rid of that 6, right, we divide by 6, divide by 6, and divide by 6. So we have y equals, remember that's a negative 1, so it's negative 1/6x plus 30/6 is 5, right? So if we're just looking at the m, right, that's negative 1/6. That's important. And if we kind of split this in half and we look at this other one, right, solving for y here is just dividing by 3. Divide by 3, divide by 3. So we have 18/3 is 6x. And then negative 6 divided by 3 is negative 2. And so that m equals 6 here because the m is always next to x, right? So again, whatever number is next to x is my slope. Now, again, this might not look like anything super big, but remember that's 6/1. So that's negative 1/6. And then 6/1, well, 6 is on top, the 1 is on bottom, and then it's a positive. So it went from negative to positive, which means that that's an opposite reciprocal. Which means that that is perpendicular. And so that's all the question was asking for. To get a little bit more practice with this, guys, I'm going to go over and do 13. And I'm going to say, well, if I'm solving for y, right, I'm going to get negative 5x minus 5x. I have negative y equals negative 5x plus 4. Remember, this means that that's a negative 1y. Divide by negative 1, divide by negative 1, and divide by negative 1. That's probably the biggest thing people forget, guys. Remember, that's still a negative y. So y equals negative 5 divided by negative 1 is a positive 5x minus 4. And so my m, again, is equal to 5. So we're still practicing those skills, guys, of solving for y, making, and then m here, well, that's really just m equals negative 1/5. Again, kind of similar to 12, right? We have to think about that as 5/1. The flip is 1/5, and then this is a positive. This changes to a negative. So again, this is a perpendicular because of the opposite reciprocal. And so I'm going to abbreviate that. If we look at 14, right, these are both in standard form, guys. It's a little bit much, right? But again, solve for y. minus 3x minus 3x. Negative y equals negative 3x plus 2. Again, that's dividing by a negative 1, which most people forget. And then y equals negative 3 divided by negative 1. Well, that's a positive 3x. And then negative 2. So my m equals whatever number is next to x, which is 3. Now I have 12x minus 4y equals 4. Again, I'm going to subtract 12x first. Subtract 12x. That cancels out because that becomes 0. We have negative 4y equals negative 12x plus 4. Divide by negative 4. Divide by negative 4. Divide by negative 4. Again, it has to be that negative 4. We can't forget that sign. So we have y equals 3x minus 1, which my m is equal to 3 here. Oh, remember, they're the same slope. Same slope means that they are parallel. Okay. Try 15 on your own, guys. Just to give you guys a little bit of a break. And then check it with me. So now, this time we have y equals, it should be pretty easy, but m equals 1 here because we have to think about the 1x right there. Well, the other one is also in y equals mx plus b, and if, just a heads up, if it helps you, write mx plus b. Well, the m again is negative 1 because that's negative 1x. So the m equals negative 1. Well, again, kind of like we were talking about during that little, almost a warm-up of, what is a negative reciprocal or an opposite reciprocal. Well, remember, this is 1 over 1, and this is still 1 over 1, right? The reciprocal is just 1 over 1 and then flipping it. Well, they're opposite reciprocals. Which means that they are perpendicular. Number 16, just throwing it back to 4.1 on how to do parallel and perpendicular lines. Here, we're throwing it back to 4.1 in terms of Hoy and Vux. So this is a Hoy, and this is a Vux. So because it's y equals just a plane number, right? So we're thinking this is a horizontal line, and this is a vertical line. Well, a horizontal line and a vertical line, right? If I, draw them a little bit closer, they are going to also be perpendicular. So a perpendicular line is what we have here. So they are perpendicular to each other. And we really just have to know that also, if we're thinking about that, I know I drew it out, right? But the m equals 0 here, and the u means undefined here, right? So, right, we've already said that those are perpendicular lines. I like the visual, guys, but again, if you know O equals 0 and U equals undefined, that's another way to do it as well. Now from here, right, we've talked about, how to figure out if they're parallel and perpendicular, but now we have to write those equations. So just thinking about that, right, we're thinking parallel lines have the same slopes, and perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal or negative reciprocal slopes. I like the word opposite because opposites are like positive and negative, right? We're not thinking, necessarily negative reciprocals all the time. But if we think about that,